touch screen. Going live. How good the internet connection is, everybody?
No, we need an upgrade. I don't think that's the next thing. These fibre cable coming in.
Well, everyone, I don't know whether we're connected or not. Let's give it a go. I don't know how strong our internet connection is at the moment. Oliver's there, but he's about 20 seconds behind me now. Is our internet connection any good? We look okay. We look okay. Good. Let me reach forward. I'm really sorry, everybody, that it's taken us a while to get sorted out. We were all ready, and then we started gossiping, and then suddenly we realised that we weren't ready. So I really apologise to you. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for waiting. Should we just begin with a time of quiet? I think we need a time of quiet more than you probably do it at the moment. We might just bow our heads and pray. God our Father, we thank you for your presence among us this evening. Pray for our young people, for our children. We ask you to bless them tonight, to bless all our families. We make our prayer through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Oliver, shall I give you the laptop and then for you to have the questions? Don't end stream, but the questions are clearer then. Okay, thank you very much. We're still talking to each other, but I think we're probably about there. What a difficult year it's been. It's been a difficult year for everything, and it's been just as difficult in church and with First Communion. This is the third time now we've tried to celebrate our First Communion masses, and this is the last time. Honestly, we will have our First Communion masses come rain or come shine, and we'll have them on the 26th of June, and I'll speak in a moment about what times they are. So we will have them. I'm conscious for you as well how different things have been. You know, we began our preparation and then we had to stop it. We started again for a little bit and then had to stop. So there is a feeling, you know, of our children having some preparation and perhaps not as much as they ordinarily would have done. It's just the way it is this year, unfortunately. What I want to do perhaps is to speak about, firstly, some of the practical things that are happening when we celebrate Mass at the moment, as you know about Sunday by Sunday. And then to perhaps think about how might that apply to our First Communion Masses? What might that look like? What might some of the implications be? And then perhaps thirdly, just some general things about First Communion itself and First Communion Masses. And then if that hasn't answered all your questions, we can have a chance just to have a word after that. So if there's anything either that strikes you as you go along or at the end, then put something in the chat and we can have a look at that. So, shall I clarify first of all so that we all know and we all remember, okay? First Communion then is going to take place on Saturday, the 26th of June. At St. Augustine's, there'll be two masses. One at 11 o'clock and then one at 2 o'clock. The Mass at 11 o'clock will be for those young people who were in preparation group 1 when we used to meet. Now, I'm sure you've not got a clue which preparation group you were in, but it was those young people whose surnames began with A through till J. Were in preparation group 1 and used to meet at the earlier time. So if your surname begins with A through to J, as you've seen on the list that was sent to you recently, that you'll make your First Communion at 11 o'clock. For those young people then whose surnames begin with K through till Z, then you were part of preparation group number 2, the second one, and you'll make your first communion at 2 o'clock. Yeah. I know people from Our Lady of Lourdes parish. You were scattered across 2 different groups. Some of you were in 1, some of you were in 2, but we'll just have 1 First Communion Mass at Our Lady of Lourdes, and that First Communion Mass is at 11 o'clock. So 2 of them will happen simultaneously, 1 at St Augustine's and 1 at Our Lady of Lourdes. You should have had, well, you have had that information quite a few times. I just want to say it again clearly. In terms of a practice, a rehearsal, then, will be a separate one for each Mass, because it'll be specific to those families and young people for each Mass. And again, as I've said to you, then, if you're making your First Communion at the 11 o'clock Mass, then there'll be a rehearsal for you on the evening before, Friday evening, at 4 o'clock here in church. If you're making your First Communion, the second one, at 2 o'clock, there'll be a practice, a rehearsal at 5 o'clock on Friday. Yeah. And if you're making your First Communion at Our Lady of Lourdes, then we'll have a practice the night before at 5 o'clock. Yeah. All of that was in the email that I've sent to you. We've had a few times, but I just wanted to remind you of it. Okay. What's different at Mass at the moment, each Sunday that we gather and also during the week, are a few things. One of them, unfortunately, is that our congregations can't sing at Mass, and that's been a real loss, really. We've had to have things like test and trace. You know, as people come to Mass, they've had to scan a QR code, they've had to perhaps make a note of the name of one person in their party. We've had a different way in and a different way out, so there's just one movement of people. We've only received communion under one kind at Mass. We've not received communion from the chalice at Mass. As we've received communion, we've done so in silence rather than speak to each other. We haven't had a sign of peace at Mass. And the thing I've worried most about, above all those things, is when we've come to the collection, we haven't passed it along the benches as we go along, and we've left it to your trust to put some money by the door as you go out, just so again that we're not passing things and touching things. So all of our ways of gathering have felt second best, I think, in lots of ways, but I think we've found ways of celebrating Mass in such a way that despite that, it's still been good quality. And I think that's going to be the same for our First Communion Masses. They won't quite be the same as they traditionally were, but they'll be a good quality celebration. And they'll be one to remember for all our young people in exactly the same way that each of them has been in previous years. So I want to say something then specifically about the First Communion Masses themselves, and perhaps how those general principles might apply to what we're going to do for First Communion. When we were planning this third date in the letter I wrote to you, we were suggesting that we were leaving the dates as late as possible so that all restrictions would have finally finished on the 21st of June. I think none of us know now where we'll be after the 21st of June. So we're going to have to plan as if things were identical to the way that they are now. And if they're different, then that's a bonus. The main difference that it will make is about the number of people that we can have in church. That at the moment in the church, I think seats are arranged with 1 metre distance between rows, and then between groups or families of people. And at the moment, in that varied configuration, we can only seat about 130, 140 at the very most people. So all I want to say to you is that we can only have 6 guests for each family. And I know that's a lot smaller than we would have hoped for, expected in the past, but everything about this year is a lot more difficult, isn't it? So that would be the child themselves and then 6 guests. Realistically, that's perhaps going to mean parents, siblings, and probably 2 others, 3 others, depending on the size of your family. Where there's 2 children, I think we have to have a bit of a compromise, but nonetheless, I think it would be unfair to say that is double the number, because, two brothers, sisters have the same number of parents generally, have the same number of brothers and sisters generally, the same other relatives. So we'll perhaps have a bit of flexibility, but it can't be double the number just because there are 2 children from one family. Equally, there may be some families for whom there are just 3 of you. For some families there may be a lot smaller group because other relatives or friends were going to come from abroad. Some people were saying family were going to come from Poland or from Latvia or other places, and they won't be able to come. So you might well find, and we might well find, that some families are a lot smaller than they were. When we have the rehearsal, what we will do is to find out how many people are going to be in your family group. We will arrange the seating in the church for your family group, and we'll place your child's name there so that we'll be able to make a configuration of chairs based upon the actual arrangements of families that we have. And hopefully that will allow us to, make enough space for the young people that we have. But if we were to have the full 7 people, the child and 6 others, there are 25 children in each group. So that, if you're good at maths, comes to 175. So, it can't be at all any more than 6 people. And hopefully it'll be a bit less. So when we have our rehearsal, we'll work that out and see what we can do about that. So I'm sorry, but unfortunately the numbers, that is all we can do. Good. Oliver's just reminded me, it's a good point. Tonight's technology probably isn't a very good example, but we're sorted out a lot better in the church, honestly, at being able to stream something from the church, and that we would be able to and hope to stream each of those First Communion masses, at least 2 out of 3 or something like that. Probably the 2 at St Augustine's. There might be somebody else who's willing to offer something at Our Lady of Lourdes. So there'll be that facility. We might send out details of that then during the week beforehand, should that be something you'd find helpful. Thank you, that's a good point. We do operate test, track and trace when people come into church, but I think because we have, people can either use the app or people give a contact point for their family group. But because we have a contact detail for each family group, I think we're fine about that. So we won't need to take your contact details as you come into church. But if you're happy with that, we'll use the contact details that you gave us when you first registered in order to be able to do that. When it comes to celebrating Mass, we'll just need to remain in our places throughout Mass. We'll also need to either remain standing or seated, but not kneel during Mass, just so that gives us again enough space between each other. When it comes to First Communion itself, obviously our young people will come forward at that point. At the rehearsal though, we'll go through exactly how that will happen and who will do that. But as a principle, we'll just remain as stationary as we can during Mass. The children themselves won't need to wear masks during Mass, but the rest of us will need to wear a mask during Mass, unless you're exempt from doing so for some reason. Those were the particular things I wanted to say about First Communion during this pandemic time. The other things I wanted to say was just about First Communion Masses in general. Photographs are often things that we want, isn't it, as a way of valuing an occasion, of keeping special memories of it. What I'd like to say though is that during our First Communion Masses, we don't take any photographs during Mass. I think particularly at this time as well, for us to be standing up and moving around and leaning across each other isn't something to do. And I also think it can be very disruptive and distracting to each other, really. After Mass, we'll find opportunities for us to have photographs together. We'll find ways of having space between each other to do that. So there'll be lots of opportunities to do that afterwards, but not during Mass. We won't take any photographs during Mass itself.
People will have a live stream, of course, to look back on.
And perhaps as an opportunity, the live stream, obviously you'll be able to watch live, but equally it can remain there. It won't be on a public channel, it'll be on a channel with a link to it, and you'll be able to access that subsequently. Yeah, good. Becoming mundane about what we perhaps wear or don't wear. I think for boys to dress smartly, to wear a shirt, perhaps a tie, some smart trousers, some shoes, shoes rather than trainers, to wear some shoes. But as a principle, to dress smartly. I think at one level the same is true for girls. However, though, there's a tradition of dressing, differently with a white dress or something. It might well be that white dress fitted a year ago and it might well not do any more, but I'm sure you can sort something out with that. There's no problem in what we wear like that. What I would say to you is sometimes those things that girls have some gloves with them. Can I say that we wouldn't wear those gloves during Mass, please? Equally, sometimes they have a handbag with them. I don't know what children have in their First Communion handbag. Again, if we didn't have it during Mass, use it afterwards for a photograph or whatever. But if our hands were free and not covered with anything, then that would be great. I think they were the only things that I'm aware of. What we will need some help with is about some stewards, some people who could help in a few ways. We need perhaps 1-2 people that might help with car parking, particularly at St Augustine's. I think, as you know, car parking is quite poor, and so managing parking on the road, encouraging people not to park on the bend and that kind of thing. So we'd look for some people who could help with that. But but equally and perhaps more importantly, for some people to be stewards at Mass. And they would be stewards who would help to seat people, who would direct people for communion, who would help. We'd need to sanitize the church in between Masses, so might be able to help with those kind of things. So if there were, we'd only look for perhaps 6 people, something like that. So if there were some, there might be an older brother or sister that would just like to help with something like that. There might be another relative or something that would like to help with something like that. If you could, perhaps that number of people for each Mass will mean that we can celebrate Mass well. I had today a visitor and an inspection from Public Health England to the church in St Mary's in Woburn Sands, and I had to go around and show where our risk assessment was and how we dealt with groups and what happened when you came into church. So they do take that very seriously, and I think large events particularly have the opportunity of struggling to meet those COVID requirements. So anyway, some stewards, if people are able to help with that, that would be very helpful. Perhaps if you'd email to say you could do that, or mention at the rehearsal. Okay, Oliver, are there some questions I've not said anything?
We may have covered them, but I'll mention them again. Rehearsal time and place, please.
So I say it to you again, yeah? You've had a letter then with that in, so you should have a written one. If you're at the St Augustine's Saturday morning Mass at 11 o'clock, then the rehearsal will be on Friday evening at 4 o'clock. If you're at St Augustine's Mass at 2 o'clock, then the rehearsal will be on Friday at 5 o'clock. If you're at the Our Lady of Lourdes Mass at 11 o'clock, then the rehearsal will be at 5 o'clock. And obviously, the rehearsal for St Augustine's Church will be in St Augustine's Church, and the rehearsal for Our Lady of Lourdes Church will be in Our Lady of Lourdes Church.
The Friday night before.
The Friday night before, and the First Communion Mass itself.
Okay. Can the family group sit together?
Yes, that would be the intention, that the family groups were seated together, yes.
And I think you've answered what should we wear and colours, and I think that was for the children rather than for the adults, of course.
I am conscious, though, in different cultures and traditions from the one in the United Kingdom, that there might be different colours, different styles and types of dress that families wear for festive occasions. And please do wear those, dress in those, whichever is common to your culture for a celebratory occasion like First Communion. And don't feel that you have to conform to a particular way here in the UK.
Okay. One question from Yusta Bakari, I think we'll handle that directly, if that's okay. And just one last question. There was a question about what happened at St Mary's with First Communion.
Right, yes. Well, there was a very small, if that's a question from somebody who was written down to make their First Communion at St Mary's, then by all means you can be in touch about that and we can still arrange that. If it's a general inquiry about it, there was a very small group at St Mary's. Those people, a number of people got in touch during the pandemic time, and they were coming to Mass regularly on a Sunday during that time. And so we celebrated First Communion at a regular Sunday morning Mass with those young people. So there was one week, there was 2 another week, because there are only about 5 in total, and one is going to make their First Communion at Christ the King in a few weeks' time as well.
Okay, 2 more questions came in, and it's only, I think, for people into planning. Roughly how long do you expect First Communion Mass and to last?
Good. I think Mass would be no more than an hour, say. No more than an hour, yeah.
And somebody has asked, is there a chance to swap one to the other for whatever family reason? If they're booked for 2, could they come at 11? If they're 11, could they swap for the 2?
I think it would be really difficult at this stage for us to change. I mean, as you see, the numbers are at their limits in each of the places. They're divided virtually 25 each, which is very helpful. If there's, if it's really crucial, really difficult, then please do get in touch about it, and we can have a word about it. But I think as a general principle, if we really can stick to those particular times, then that would be great. I think about 2 people have spoken to me because they really can't make those particular times. But if you were able to be gracious about it, I'd be very grateful to you. Yeah. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience, particularly to begin with. I'm sorry that we were struggling. If there are any further questions, or if you're uncertain about anything, do drop me an email. If you've struggled to get emails or communication or anything like that, or you know of somebody that has, don't worry about it, honestly. Come along to the rehearsal and tell somebody to do that. If they were part of the preparation group last year and a part of our First Communion group, and who feel, gosh, I seem to have missed out on the communication, come along to the rehearsal and we can sort it out from there. But obviously that's only this year, last year's group, that's not new people. Okay, thank you everybody. You can go and watch the football now. It's starting in 10 minutes time, and you can go and watch the football. So thank you very much indeed.